Oh, I'm Patrick Bradley from Manufactured Financial Solutions. I am here with Randy Sadler and Chris Gallo, subject matter experts on captive insurance companies. This is part two of a three-part series. In part one, we talked about the basics of a captive insurance company, and today we're going to be talking about how a captive improves cash flow and liquidity. And then in part three, we're going to talk about some creative uses of captive insurance companies in the manufacturing company owner's toolbox. So gentlemen, thanks again for joining me this afternoon. And let me kick off the question, how does a captive insurance company help cash flow and liquidity?
That's a great question, Patrick. And as you know, a captive is really a choice by a business simply to own their own insurance company in really simple terms. And this slide kind of shows what we often see in manufacturing is what we call a fronted reinsured captive or a traditional captive structure. So we've got the business owners penciled in at the top, the manufacturing company or business on the left. And then you'll see this rated admitted front. So very often the manufacturer is going to need insurance coverage for at least some of their policies that have a rating, whether it's to satisfy a creditor, whether it's to satisfy a contract they have. And so this admitted front is going to give them their insurance paper, as we call it. But most of the premiums and risk are actually going to flow through to their captive. So you'll notice the captive is in gold because that's where the business owner and the business are able to stockpile cash and liquidity. So it's a beautiful thing. But we don't want to be hung out to dry. So you'll notice the captive is going to, because it has an insurance license, as we covered in our last video, it's going to buy reinsurance for some portion to pass on the really big hits, right? We don't want to take those hits, but we're willing to participate on risks that we think are manageable. If we manage those risks, then the business owner keeps the money in the captive. And so that creates, if you will, where the gold box is, an insurance company that year over year is full of money. In addition to stopping money that would have been gone to the commercial insurance market, if you just buy regular old insurance, captives also are taxed like insurance companies. So they receive favorable tax treatment, which allows them to build up even more money for loss reserves. So cash, liquidity, captives are fantastic. Chris, your thoughts?
Cash flow and liquidity is my favorite topic. Before I came to CIC Services, I was a regulator with the Connecticut Insurance Department for 35 years. The first 28 years regulating traditional insurance companies, the last 7.5 years regulating captive insurance companies. So through that whole career, though, I saw examples of extremely large companies. Companies had tremendous amount of assets, yet they caved overnight. For example, the economic crisis of 2008 and 2009, AIG was the largest property and casualty insurance company in the world. Yet due to not having, they may have had a lot of assets, but did they have an excellent cash flow and liquidity, could turn those assets into cash immediately? Not so much. And that's why they basically went broke in 1 week's time if it wasn't for the bailout from the federal government. So in any type of enterprise, I saw this throughout my career, both in traditional insurance companies, captive insurance companies, even in your one's own personal finances, cash is king. So you cannot overemphasize the importance of having tremendous cash flow and liquidity. And like Randy mentioned in that last slide, we saw that gold box, the captive box. And I mentioned in our first episode where there was hospitals in Connecticut where they formed a captive insurance company 25 years ago. And 25 years later, that's their greatest source of cash and liquidity today, because all those profits, those underwriting profits, inured to their bottom line, the hospital's bottom line, rather than the commercial carrier's bottom line. And it helps them use those funds to expand their business enterprises. So again, it's critical that having excellent cash flow and liquidity, critical to any enterprise, and a captive really helps in that arena.
Fascinating.
Yeah, so, absolutely.
So in the last video, we talked about soft markets and hard markets. And Chris, I think you defined a hard market as having 10 consecutive quarters of increasing premiums. So how does a captive insurance company help protect against hard markets?
Excellent point. And when you form a captive insurance company, again, because you're adding the captive insurance company to make your risk mitigation strategies extremely robust. And also by forming a captive insurance company, you have access to the wholesale insurance market, also known as the reinsurance market. That's where traditional insurance companies go to buy their insurance. They go to the lesser expensive wholesale market. Whereas if you don't have your own insurance company, when you go to get one's own insurance for their business needs or for your own personal needs, we access the retail insurance market, which is more costly. But by forming your own captive, those profits inuring to your bottom line. If there's a hard market, all of a sudden premiums keep on going up, you've already formed your own insurance company. You might say, hey, you know what? We've only been taking on 50% of the risk. Now the markets are really hard. Maybe we'll take on 60, 70, or 80% of the risk. And you have that ability because you've got the assets built up in your financial vehicle, the captive insurance company. And that's how it can help you withstand hard markets.
Interesting. So another question: how does the business CFO look at captive insurance companies?
Yeah, good question. And we see this a lot in manufacturing, but also other industries. And CFOs often, really view the captive as their own little toolbox, if you will. So, a really disciplined CFO will realize that it's another financial vehicle for them. It's not just savings. It's not just, can I lower my insurance costs? Because it can certainly lower insurance costs and create tax favored growth and assets inside of an insurance company that the company controls. But it really is a source of liquidity and also can be a source of investment. So I'll give you an example. In manufacturing, let's say you're really reliant on a certain commodity. Could be steel, could be copper, could be a wide range of things. So you're relying on this commodity, and the price to your customer would go up if that commodity price went up, right? So maybe you have contracts in place. So how do you hedge that? Well, your captive, which is full of cash, could actually buy futures in that commodity. So if that commodity price goes up and it hurts the business temporarily, the captive actually has a gain because it bought the commodity as a hedge and could then feed a dividend back to the company to offset that increase in that jolt. So then the company actually really smooths it out, right? So you can just see how a captive creates a whole set of tools for a CFO that they wouldn't have had otherwise.
We talked about it as a toolbox for the CFO, and that's exactly what it is. Basically, there's three components of a captive insurance company. One addresses the risks of the business owner. Two, the captive becomes a financial weapon for many things. It builds up the assets, it can help the business grow. We have one example of a captive where they are forming a holding company above the captive, whereby they'll give non-voting shares to, like this one hospitality captive. He wants to bring in the top chefs, and he could bring in those top chefs because in addition to the salary, they said, listen, you're going to be an owner, a part owner of this captive insurance company. So as the profits inure to the captive, all of a sudden the chef now saying, hey, I could profit as an owner. And lastly is as the business owner has built up his successful business and his successful captive insurance company, we got all those captive assets in there. The assets can be extricated through a tax-free dividend to a wholly owned holding company, whereby it could also set up the business owner of the business and of the captive for a very comfortable, wealthy retirement. So we like to say there's actually three parts of the captive that is really a weapon for the CFO.
Interesting. So you may have already answered this, but I noticed on your website you have a tagline that says, "Turn risk into wealth." What would you like the audience to know about that?
Yeah, so turn risk into wealth really is just saying that what I always like to start out by saying is usually people that I talk to, manufacturing company owners, CEOs, CFOs, insurance is often a grudge purchase, right? So we have to do it. We don't like it. Usually our rates go up. So, it's sort of like fixing the muffler on your car, right? So it's a grudge purchase. But when you own your own insurance company, all of a sudden, what used to be a grudge purchase becomes a profit center, if you will. So it can actually be a source of, joy, and even as that profit center begins to accumulate wealth, like a second company, that can be accessed by the business or by the business owner, depending on the ownership structure. And so really turning risk management into profit or into wealth is really what we mean by our tagline. And so it's a great way to go from hating insurance to loving insurance, right?
Right. Okay, gentlemen. Well, thanks very much. This wraps up part 2 of 3. And for our audience, if you want to search for part 1, just search for captives part and then the number 1. This one will be captives and then part and the number 2. And our third series is going to be how we use captive insurance companies as a creative tool in the toolbox. Hey, Randy and Chris, thanks a ton for joining me this afternoon. I really enjoyed it, and I'm sure our audience is going to find this information very helpful.
Pleasure's all ours. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Bye for now.